First of all, I would like to welcome Sonja Munnix, that is International Coordinator Sustainable Logistics at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and Sonja is actually one of the main drivers of this session and workshop, and she will give us an introduction of the Dutch targets and instruments towards zero emissions road freight. And really glad Netherlands to see it's in the forefront of Europe in this piece. So really looking forward to your presentation, Sonja. So then the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in this webinar. And I cannot see myself anymore. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So as you can see, it's a bright sunny day here in the Netherlands. And I have an orange sunscreen, so I'm kind of orangey. So you could say I really live up to my Dutch heritage as orange being our national color. But I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to thank Fernando and Peter for the opportunity to the Netherlands, the invitation to share our approach towards zero emission road freight transport. And as Fernando introduced me, I work for Netherlands Enterprise Agency as the International Coordinator on Sustainable Logistics. And Netherlands Enterprise Agency is a policy implementation agency, and we work on behalf of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, closely working together towards achieving this transition. So first, my agenda for today. I only have a short amount of time, so I thought I'll give you a broad overview and then dig into a few subjects per item. So first, I'd like to take you through our national framework, digging into the zero emission zones. I then would explain something about our European and international context, digging in to the global MOU, and then I'll talk about some instruments that we have to facilitate this transition for companies. So that's the program for today. First, I'd like to take you through our national climate agreement. Following the Paris Agreement in 2015, the Netherlands concluded its own national climate agreement, making sure that we reach our goal, which is achieving a reduction of CO2 emission reduction of 60% by 2030. And this national climate agreement, which was concluded in 2019, is divided into 5 sectors, mobility being one of them. And this infographic shows all the actions towards mobility. You can see all the blue ones are for sustainable logistics. And although medium and heavy duty vehicles account for only a small portion of the fleet of vehicles in Netherlands, or well, worldwide in any case, and also but for a large amount of the kilometers, but also for a very large amount of the CO2 emission of the sector. So therefore we have some ambitious targets towards freight decarbonization, which I'll take you through. These are kind of our national strategies towards transport. And I know we're focusing on freight today, but I thought I'll give you the full package, also some about passenger road transport, because we also want all new passenger cars to be zero emission by 2030, and also public transport. All public buses should be zero emission by 2030, which accounts for the whole fleet, but by 2025 already, all new buses coming into operation should be zero emission. And then for freight, you can see here what are our targets within the National Climate Agreement. So we have goals towards zero emission construction logistics and mobile machineries, also about climate neutrality for the construction sector. We also have a goal of 30% of CO2 emission reduction for regional and international long-haul transport by 2030. Goals about sustainable inland shipping, which I will not focus about today, and zero emission city logistics by 2030, which I will dig into a bit further later. And also we have some administrative agreements with sector parties in municipalities, also for targeting specific segments. For example, there is an administrative agreement for 2030 municipalities to have 100% new sales of target transport, so dedicated transport, for example, for school children or for elderly people. And also we have an administrative agreement, Green Deal, for new sales of refuse vehicles to be zero emission by 2030. So that's also, we do a lot of in collaboration with relevant stakeholders. Then something about the zero emission zones that I already mentioned. In our climate agreement, it is mentioned that by 2025, 30 to 40 cities will have a zero emission zone for all logistical vehicles. And at the moment, 28 cities, or maybe even 30, not really sure about I think maybe it's already 30, have already announced the boundaries of their zones. And the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management is taking the lead on the national coordination and harmonizing. But of course, we do it closely together with municipalities and industry. And also all the regulations that were developed and are hand in hand together with municipalities and with companies, because we have built up a kind of consultation structure with working groups where we discuss all the developments, all the regulations, and also monitor what's happening. And to cater for some anxieties and also some market concerns, we have a transition period also for freight vehicles. It's kind of small, I think, in the image, but you can see it here. From 2025 onwards to 2030, you can see that for different types of vehicles, there are some transition periods before they have to be zero emission. We'll share the slides afterwards, so you can look into this if you want, of course, any further. And to facilitate this transition, we also have some purchase subsidies, which I will come to later. Then, of course, an important condition also for this transition for zero emission road freight transport is the accompanying refueling and charging infrastructure. Because we're talking about zero emission here, it's about hydrogen and charging infrastructure. And for hydrogen, we have the goal that by 2025, we should have 50 hydrogen refueling stations, which complies with the AFIR, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, which is an EU regulation on this subject. The focus for hydrogen is really on heavy-duty purposes. And at the moment, the ministry is preparing a subsidy scheme towards 2024, which focuses on refueling stations, also including the vehicles making use of these stations. And for charging infrastructure, we have developed, together with all relevant stakeholders, a multi-annual national agenda on charging infrastructure, with a specific task group also on logistics. But my colleague Peter van Kerkhoff will tell you all about that, so I will not dwell on that any longer. Then something about our European and international framework. Of course, very important is the standards for trucks for CO2 emission. And last February, the Commission revised its proposal, which in short is here, but I'm sure you all know about it. That with some a revised goal for 2030 and some new targets for 2035 and 2040, which is now under negotiation. Then there's also the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, which gives minimum requirements for the rollout of charging and hydrogen infrastructure across the Trans-European Network for Transport, the TEN-T routes. And then, very important also internationally, is the global MOU on zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles. This is actually co-initiated by the Netherlands government together with Kelstart, and it is already signed by 27 nations and calls for an ambition in 2040 that all sales of new medium and heavy-duty vehicles should be zero-emission, with an intermediate goal that by 2030 this should be 30% share of new sales. And the Netherlands is only a small country, so we really need international collaboration to make our goals happen as well. So we believe that transition can only happen if we work together on a global scale, because then we also can secure some security about future demand for the industry. So the vehicles will be there, cost will come down, And so the transition will hopefully will go sooner and also a bit smoother. And also in this global memorandum of understanding, we work together with different countries to share our thoughts and best practices, so help each other to really reach this ambition. Here you see an overview of the countries that have signed this global MOU. As you can see, it's quite broadly divided across the world. And at the last climate conference in Egypt, 10 more countries signed this agreement, among which some island nations, which is great, and also the United States, as one of the big truck markets in the world. I think a great addition to the group of countries who want to do this. Then I'm focusing on some of the instruments we have for facilitating these innovations to zero-emission vehicles. This is a general overview. I'm sure you've all seen the adoption curve by Rogers before. And there are, of course, specific instruments for different phases in this innovation. But now I'll focus on an innovation scheme that we had, which is called DKTI Transport, and on some purchase subsidies. So first, this DKTI Transport subsidy scheme. It was a demonstration program we had for climate-related innovations in transport in 3 rounds, 2017, 2019 and 2021. The aim was to stimulate transition to innovative and sustainable energy carriers, and it subsidized innovation and development in all of the transport modes and also all energy carriers, including biofuels were also part of the scheme, supporting also the deployment of the infrastructure. And the aim was actually to really build an ecosystem. So it was targeted at the collaboration between private companies, knowledge institutions, and NGOs. And here you can see some of the results of these 3 rounds we had. You can see in a total we had 135 projects, mostly focusing on battery electric and hydrogen vehicles. And the government spent 115 million euros of subsidies in 3 rounds, but it was coupled with 127 million of private sector investments in these same projects. It gave a major boost to the innovation ecosystem, and many of the concepts that were developed were afterwards introduced in the market. And I can say that Breitner, who is talking next after me, also received, also had some projects in this subsidy scheme. So I hope it really helped them to introduce the market. Then something about the purchase subsidies, of course, also a very important instrument, because these zero-emission vehicles are now still more expensive than ICE versions of the same categories. We have a subsidy for cars, for vans, and also for construction vehicles, which was last year exhausted in only 1 day. So a big demand there. And then we have a subsidy for trucks, a purchase subsidy, which also was exhausted in 1 day in 2022. Here are some results of this subsidy. And it was even so that the ministry had to find extra money to be able to handle a larger amount of the request, which luckily was possible. And the subsidy is so that companies receive a percentage of the surcharge of the price for a zero-emission vehicle, and the amount is higher for a smaller company. So bigger companies receive 40% of the surcharge as a subsidy, and for SMEs it's up to 60%. The subsidy was applied for all vehicles above 4,250 kilos, and in total, after the extra money for 25 million, we had a lot of requests, almost 500, and 80% could be granted, and an average of 67,385 euros, as you can see here on the slide, was subsidized for the zero-emission trucks. And you can see in the table on the right that it was a kind of general division between the different sectors, the different segments of the sector. And the larger vehicles were requested more for subsidy, and a large percentage went to battery electric vehicles, a smaller percentage to hydrogen electric vehicles. So this is kind of a very short overview on the things we do in the Netherlands. And I'm happy that the next speakers will be giving the point of view from a company, from a city, and also with some more information on charging infrastructure. So I hope after this webinar, you have a great view of what we are doing. And thank you for your attention. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sonja, for the great presentation and the insights on your programs and concrete measures. Yes, for anybody that wants to ask a question to Sonja, I remind you can share that question in the chat, or you can just react and raise your hand, so then we can give the floor and you ask the question live. I see one question here coming.
Fernando, should I stop the sharing, or would that be, is it better? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, maybe you stop sharing, that's good. So then, okay. Sonja, there is one question, is that if there will be enough supply of trucks to reach the goals? That's the question.
Yes, that's a good question, of course. It's a big debate, of course, in the market. I think some geopolitical developments happening now also hinder this. But I think we see that the technology is ready. So it is possible to drive with zero-emission trucks, to do a large part of the operations. And I know that many of the manufacturers of trucks have stated that a large part of their manufacturing will be zero-emission, battery electric trucks first, and some hydrogen trucks also coming later into the market. So I have good hopes that this will be happening. And I think instruments like the global MOU that we have signed with 27 countries also gives manufacturers the kind of trust that we will have this transition and there will be enough demand, so they should step up their manufacturing.
Meantime, I also see there are some answers from spontaneous answers from the participants in the chat, actually referring to one of the reports from ASEA, and actually we had a meeting last week in which many different players were, and as a result of that meeting, we got a reassure on the availability of trucks, probably on the availability and capability to build the infrastructure, recharging infrastructure, but it was still a little bit more in the air. It was the ability or capability of the electricity grid and the available renewable energy sourcing those charging points, and that was a little bit more the question mark, but probably will be going into that later. Then there is one additional question, Sonja. It's actually, it was also my question. Is there will be additional budget for incentives for zero emissions electric heavy duty vehicles this year or in the coming years?
Yes, there will be, especially for construction material. I think the purchase subsidy scheme will open very shortly. I think a new subsidy round for this year, and also for trucks, which we call the ANZ subsidy. I think it will open in May with a new round of subsidies. And probably for the coming years as well, we'll have a new round of purchase subsidy coming up.
Okay, that's...
So yes, and also for vans, because of course for the zero emission zones, also for vans this is also important. And also for vans, we have a running subsidy scheme as well at the moment, still open for this year.
Perfect. Those are really great news, and hope you can share with us the link or the news when this is so open.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. We will. Yes.
And as I know, there are many other member states or countries here in this session. Yeah, if you have open opportunities for subsidies or programs supporting zero emissions, you can always share those links in the chat, so then you can promote also your goals within this session. I don't see any additional questions so far. So then, if anybody else wants to make a question, you can still do in the chat. But then we move slowly to the next speaker. But before that, thank you very much, Sonja, for the presentation and this collaboration in this session that we have a very good framework, as Peter said, to continue this collaboration and making sure we get this connection between programs and different countries and the different companies as well. Talking about
Yeah.
companies, then
Well,
okay,
thank you very much, Fernando. And maybe I'll stay in the webinar. So if there are any questions coming up later, I'm happy to answer any later.
that's really great.